Welcome back to another episode of your business and marketing class. I am your host, Miss J, and away we go. Listen, I promised you we would follow up on your assignment, not last week. So last week you guys did a little bit of work with social media. The week before you did a little bit of work with HR. And once I got through all of your responses, and oh my gosh, they were so good. I took a lot of notes and tallied kind of like what you guys had decided. And I wanted to give you a little bit of a recap on how I would handle the situation, some of the things that you guys had said. In retrospect, I probably should have done this as a discussion so that all of you guys could have commented on seeing how everybody would do this differently. But it's a mistake. I'll remember for next time. So to refresh your memory, we had a fun HR situation at a automotive company. They have 4 different dealerships in different cities. Now, it gave you a little bit of background on the company that has been open for 50 years. It's pretty successful. Down below, if we keep going in the third paragraph, it talks to you about Mr. Peterson, who has worked for the company for 42 years. By this description, he's a stellar employee. He's fantastic. No complaints whatsoever. However, recently we had that little incident in the break room where Mr. Peterson and another male employee got into a little bit of an argument, and Mr. Peterson grabbed him kind of by the scruff of his neck and pulled him real close, almost like maybe in a threatening way. But he quickly realized what happened, let go. So your job was to kind of answer these 5 questions. What exactly should we do in this situation? And as someone who used to work in HR, this stuff does happen. And you have to think of all of the pieces of the puzzle to make sure that you're making the right decision. Now, I will tell you guys, the very first time that I read through this role play, the only thing that mattered to me, the only thing that stuck out was right here in this paragraph here, it says, Adrian Automotive does not and will not tolerate physical violence. So my response to that was, he's out of here. Mr. Peterson is so fired. He's done. Don't care about what he gave to the company. He's out of here. He violated this very, very strict policy. Bye-bye. And what was interesting is the first time I did this with my class, nobody thought he should be fired. Nobody in the entire class. And I was like I did a raise of hands. I was like, who thinks this guy should be fired? And nobody raised their hand, and I was like, okay, this is weird. That's the right answer, right? No, that is not the right answer. There's really no exact right answer on how to handle this. It's based on what you've kind of done in your HR department, precedent you have set before. So we're going to break this down just a little bit on each of these 5 sections. Some of the things that you guys brought up that taught me something, some of the things that I want to address that maybe we didn't think about. And then I also just kind of, I think that's all I want to do. Talk about what you guys said. Oh, and then of course, my response, how I would handle each of these situations. I want to say, though, doesn't mean that my answer is right. Just because I have a human resources degree does not mean that my answer is right for this company specifically. I just kind of want to give you guys from my experience. So I also want to state that some of you really did teach me a few things I never thought about that. Also, some of you should apply for the next HR director job because you have this absolutely down and nailed. You know exactly what you should do. So well done, you. So first and foremost, immediate steps with Mr. Peterson. Some of you guys, a lot of you guys all said you're going to call him in and have a conversation, right? You're going to hear his side of the story. You're not going to make assumptions about what happened. You want to hear what he said. And a couple of you made a really strong point. You're going to document it. Document the conversation that you have, meaning you're going to write down what was said in that conversation. So if you have to refer back to that, maybe in a court of law, you have something to say, I wrote this right when we were talking. Some of you said while you're doing this investigation, maybe Mr. Peterson should be on leave, right? Which is really smart. Making sure he's removed from the equation. He can't influence anything. Some of you said it should be paid. Some of you said it should be unpaid. It's kind of up to what your company's policy is. One thing that was mentioned is a lot of people brought up that remedial action. And remember, that's what we read kind of in our textbook reading. That can be either preventative or it can be corrective action. Now, preventative is something that happens beforehand to hopefully decrease the chances of an incident actually happening. In this situation, what we're doing is corrective action. So, whatever we decide needs to be the disciplinary action for Mr. Peterson, that's called corrective action because it's happened after an event has already happened. So, just a quick distinction right there. Some of you also mentioned maybe we should not fire him, but pay for anger management classes. So, I started doing a tally and it got like in between my 3 classes. So many of you were like, don't fire this guy. He's great. There's a few things that we can do. Now, on the flip side, what should we do with the victim? What should we do with the victim? Now, this one gets tricky because a lot of you mentioned that there was no actual violence, like there was no physical violence. However, we have to consider that like threatening tone, right? He grabbed him and brought him close. Does that employee feel safe in this work environment? So yes, he didn't like punch him that resulted in him having to go to the emergency room. But is that a greater infraction than like this mental anguish we've put on? We can't say that it's not, right? This person, this victim could feel like they've been harmed greatly. Like their mental state could be harmed greatly. They could be looking over their shoulder every second that they're at work because they're so nervous about what's going to happen. So that is something that we need to take into account. Yes, even though it didn't result in like an injury for him, we can't say that mentally he wasn't harmed because he probably was. So a lot of you had the same kind of setup as handling Mr. Peterson, where you would bring him in and let him tell his side of the story. And of course, document it, right? You would write it down. Now, should we put him on paid leave? That was a suggestion a few of you have. Should we pay for therapy for this person? Really interesting concept of we're going to do the right thing for this person. It happened here at our workplace, so we're going to take care of him. So a lot of really good ideas. A lot of you guys said maybe safety going forward, we move him to another dealership. We schedule them at different times so that they don't see each other. Now, this is going to kind of come up in our culture question, but we have to be really smart about how we handle this, because if we make this victim work in this workplace and we haven't really like solved this issue, or let's say Mr. Peterson really, there's no big consequences for him, that person could feel like they're in like a hostile work environment. Like if other, like Mr. Peterson's friends and coworkers start like taking it out on him, like, how dare you bring this up? Actually, one person did bring up the fact that like if the investigation shows that Mr. Peterson like really didn't do, like, yes, he did grab him by the scruff of his neck, but this other guy maybe said something like crazy offensive, or said something that would like not be encouraged by the company, maybe the victim should be fired. So some things to think about as far as how we handle this going forward. Now, the solution, we kind of had some people say, we had a few people say, like, fire him, get him out of there. A lot of people say, don't fire him. Like I said, one person said we should potentially fire the victim if it turns out that he was lying about what happened. Now, another interesting thing that we could think about is based on Mr. Peterson's record, if the investigation comes back that, like, yeah, this guy, he did something pretty shady. Maybe there's been other situations in the past he's done this with people. It's just never come to light, and he doesn't need to work there anymore. Based on like his 42 years of stellar service, would we give him the option to resign instead of being terminated, so that it would show that he left his job willingly, like he retired or what have you? Or, say when we conclude this investigation, there's a chance that you could be terminated, and just kind of give him that option. So there's a few different things we can do there. I've kind of talked about some of the other solutions as I've gone on. But this says, how does the incident and the solution affect the organizational culture? This is big, you guys. This piece is big. How are people going to perceive this? If you think that people don't know about this and aren't going to talk about it, yeah, they are. When things happen at Air Academy High School, all of you guys know about it because of people taking videos or people talking about it, right? Not something that I would definitely discourage and have people not continue those conversations, but things do spread, right? So a couple of things we have to think about. If Mr. Peterson gets fired right off the bat, are people going to start thinking, wow, I thought we were kind of like a family, a close-knit business. If I slip up one time, I'm out of the family. Like, that's kind of crazy. Or if there's not like super severe consequences, then maybe they don't value safety as much as we think our company values safety. We want to continue to have a positive culture. So I think you have to remember that this all can't be definitely like, it's not ever going to be hush hush. People are going to talk about it. So you need to make sure that you are getting ahead of this and talking about the positive culture. Some of you mentioned like maybe doing trainings on what the handbook actually states so that everybody's like in the know about what's going to get them terminated or in trouble or what have you. But this will have an impact. So you have to have a plan as an HR manager. Now, a lot of you, the last one was about the handbook. And a lot of you said, like, yes, it needs to be amended. Yes, it needs to be changed. It's a little bit too vague. And I would agree. When I read that Adrian Automotive does not and will not tolerate physical violence, to me, that means fired. If you have any sort of violence or what could be perceived as violence, you're out of here. And a lot of you guys didn't read it that way. So, yes, it needs to be more specific. So it says, does not and will not tolerate physical violence, including but not limited to, and a list of things. Maybe like you could say some of the things you guys mentioned, like physically punching or hurting or harming or threatening violence, which is almost what happened with Mr. Peterson. We don't know what he said, but that motion is kind of a threatening notion. So, there's some pieces that I think it needs to be addressed in the handbook. Now, a couple of you said we would write in the handbook that you cannot have conversations that aren't work related. So it says in the situation they were having a non-work related conversation. Now, that is tough because it is very hard to enforce. So if you're going to enforce it for this situation, you have to enforce it for all. So remember, if you're creating something for the handbook, it has to be enforceable across the board, not just in certain situations. So if I were to say in the KDEC Coffee handbook that everybody, all team members of KDEC Coffee get a free drink on their birthday, I have to be willing to say, like, okay, that's every single person. Is it everybody who's ever worked in KDEC Coffee before, even if they don't work in it this year? Is it just people who are in DECA? Is it people who've already had a shift for the year? I have to be really specific and willing to like follow through with that. So just keep that in mind. So as far as an HR perspective on how I would handle this situation, a lot of you were spot on in exactly how I would handle it. I would have questions with every single person involved. In fact, I've done that before. There was something inappropriate said in my back room one time. I had to have interviews with all sorts of people, not only about the situation itself, but just in general. How do you guys speak to each other in the back room? Because if this is something that has been going on or other people are involved, that you have a culture of saying inappropriate things, is it appropriate for me to just punish that one person? Do I punish everybody? Do I punish nobody? So you kind of have to have all the conversations involved. Once I've had those conversations and I really understand what's going on, there's going to be some repercussions for Mr. Peterson. So if I don't decide to fire him, I am going to do a sort of corrective action plan that basically says if anything occurs of this nature in the next 3 or maybe even 6 months, maybe 12 months, you would be terminated at that point. For the victim, I really want to make sure we're taking care of that victim. So we're going to have probably a problem solving sit down with not only me as HR, but the manager and try to problem solve exactly what we need to do to make this employee feel safe and then revisit often. So maybe have a weekly chat or a bi-weekly chat that just says, how are things going? Is this working for you? And if he says, you know what, it's really not, I still feel unsafe, we've got to come up with another solution for this employee. So really staying close to that situation. And that was a lot of what my HR job was, like constantly following up on decisions that we've made to make sure that it's still a good fit for the person and for the company. The culture, I think, That one I struggle with because we really do have to meet and chat with a lot of people. And that doesn't need to happen in like a big staff meeting session. Normally, that happens more like one on one or small group sessions to kind of talk about it. There are people that are probably a little more closely involved in this situation than others. I don't know if I'd necessarily have like one big staff meeting to address it, but probably small conversations. You can see why HR managers are so busy all the time. We're busy having conversations. And then that handbook has to be more specific. We have to state exactly what happens, what the consequences are, how corrective action works, and what we define as violence, physical violence, mental violence, or threatening violence. We have to define that in the handbook. So you guys did such a dope job on this assignment. I love how serious you took it, like you were actually in this situation. I really appreciate that. I gave like some comments back to you guys where I said like, interesting thought, or I hadn't thought about that before. If you want to go back and review, stay tuned for the next video, which is about